Augustus was maybe the second most important historical figure in Western history after his great-uncle Julius Caesar. He, with his great ingenuity and intellect, put an end to over a century of constant crisis, civil wars, and instability in the decadent and obsolete Roman Republic. As the great politician that he was able to take slowly but surely and wisely the full control over Rome and his provinces without alienating anyone on the process like Caesar did, and by that, letting the foundations of what we will later call the Roman Empire, with him being the first emperor, even if he never dared to call himself like that. Like I said, very wise of him to learn from the mistakes that Caesar made during his reign. He was in fact so good at his job that in an extremely smart move of playing reverse psychology with the Senate of Rome, he abdicated all his powers and rights that the Senate gave him previously in order to end the civil war between the Republic and Mark Antony with Cleopatra, a fake noble action that the Senate, traumatized by decades of instability and probably recognizing their own incompetence to manage such a great empire, they literally begged Augustus to stay in power, giving him even more rights and privileges that he had acquired previously. And that's how the reverse psychology plan of Augustus worked, and he could take over all of Rome institutions without having to put himself into a position of a dictator like his great-uncle, and by that, initiating really the Roman Empire era. And by the end of his reign, Augustus let the strong foundations that will let his empire to have at least the potential to be eternal, because that's what he believed. He didn't see the Roman Empire only as Roman, but he saw it as the empire of humanity, the one that would be eternal, and one day will conquer the entire world and beyond. Of course, that's not what happened, sadly, but that was definitely not Augustus' fault after he died, and indeed, he died. And maybe that's the only thing we need to change in order to make his vision of an eternal empire come true. So what if Augustus was immortal? What if the passing of time didn't affect Augustus, at least physically speaking? That's the story we are going to see today. But first, we have to make some rules about how his immortality works. First of all, he's only unaffected by physical aging. That's it. He's not indestructible. He's not superhuman. He doesn't have a healing factor like Wolverine. No, he just doesn't get old, which means that he can still die by some kind of accident, like a horse accident, which was quite common back in those days, or, of course, the classical assassination attempt that could end his life. So, as you can see, I'm not making him invincible. He will just never get old. Plus, he's immune to any kind of disease or virus, which means that things like the Antonine Plague or the Justinian Plague won't work if he survives that long into the future, of course. Second of all, his immortality is not hereditary, which means that, for example, his daughter Julia will not become immortal only because her father is, and not matter how many children will Augustus have if he wants so, they will never become immortal, and they will just be normal humans like in the real world. With all of that clarified, it is time to enter into our story of how the world will be if Augustus was immortal. So, at first, I don't believe a lot will change from the original timeline and the first years of Augustus, or Octavian at that time, being an important figure of Roman politics. After all, like I said, he's still a normal human, so until he reaches his prime around when he will be 25 years old, he won't even realize he's special. And actually, we will consider this immortality like some kind of unique virus he caught up around those years rather than a mutation that he was born with. So everything relating to Caesar, his assassination, the civil wars, the adoption of Octavian by Caesar, and all the conflicts between Octavian and Mark Antony will still happen like in the original story. Then at some point, around the time Octavian gets 24 years old, he will get sick, like extremely sick, which was quite common for him. He was always a very fragile boy who gets sick for almost anything, and a lot of times he was close to die of those diseases in the original timeline, which is still the case here, until he gets sick from this weird virus that will give immortality and immunity to any other disease or virus in the world afterwards. But for now, he will be out of commission for almost a year until he reaches 25 years old, when his body is finally full-grown and developed as an adult. And the same day of his birthday, he will wake up from his coma and recovered fully of whatever he had, feeling not just great, but perfect. He would definitely be quite shocked by the turns of these events, especially when he will realize that he doesn't get tired anymore or doesn't need to sleep as much as before. He just feels incredible, but he would not realize what happened just yet, or that he's immortal after all. That's not the kind of things you will realize when you are only in your mid-20s, especially for Augustus, which was the typical guy that always looked way younger than he really was, always keeping this almost childlike face. So for the moment, the life of Octavian and the events that followed, everything will stay the exact same. All the conflicts, the issues, the struggles of the dying Roman Republic, the pathetic attempt of Mark Antony to invade Rome with Cleopatra and their eventual retreat to Egypt, and, of course, their respective suicide that let Octavian, after a few more conflicts to resolve, to take over Egypt, but most important, take control over all of Rome's territories with more elegancy and subtlety than Caesar did, and with that, becoming Augustus, the first emperor of the now Roman Empire. After all of that, while the reign of Augustus will go more or less the same as it was in our timeline for a pretty long time, now that he was approaching his 40s, he really started to have serious questions about his condition as a mortal being, because even he was getting to a point in life where naturally the physical capability of anyone would start to decline. For him, nothing. He was still feeling as fresh and alive like in his 20s, which didn't make any sense, but he would for now assume he just had a lot of luck and that he won the lottery in terms of health, because he also didn't get sick since he recovered from the strange virus he got when he was 25. But, again, it was too soon, or early, in order to understand what was going on with him. But with time, seeing his closest friends die, like Agrippa and others, and going through his 50s and later 60s, it is going to start to be quite obvious that this was not normal, even for an exceptional, well-preserved old man like him. And little by little, he was finally accepting that maybe he has truly been blessed by the gods with the gift of immortality. It will be around the times of the Germanic campaigns that Augustus started to understand and accepting the crazy fact that he was really immortal, which gave him a gigantic boost in confidence about his well-being. Too much, maybe. Remember, this is antiquity. They didn't have an advanced understanding of how to imagine superpowers like we have today with our modern fiction, so for Augustus, being immune to aging could mean also that he was indestructible, which of course it is a very dangerous belief for him to have in order to optimize his chances to survive, but he would definitely brag about that to everyone in the empire and beyond, in order to make his enemies and people that disliked him believe that it would be impossible to assassinate him because he was blessed by the gods. But in those days, when even the most wealthy and powerful people in the world had a less comfortable and secure life than us these days, injury of any kind was inevitable at some point in your life, like again, a horse accident, for example, or a hunt that got wrong. And it is in one of those many circumstances that I think Augustus will find in the hard way that, not because he doesn't get old, it means that he's indestructible, and he still is pretty killable, like every other human, and even if it is something that Augustus will try to hide from everyone, except for his closest people and allies, it will nonetheless humble him a little in order to remember sometimes to still value life as a very fragile thing that could end at any moment. Going further into the years, eventually we will reach the infamous Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, where the Roman Empire will face his first true and clear defeat against the Germanic tribes they were trying to conquer, due of the traitor Arminius joining their side and knowing everything they needed to know in order to defeat the Roman legions. We all know how in the original timeline Augustus reacted to the news of that defeat with the famous line of,
Varus, oh, Quintus Varus, give me back my legions!
while he was punching repeatedly his head on a wall during hours like the crazy old man he became for that time. So imagine if an old man Augustus reacted that badly to the defeat of his legions in Germania. Now, how do you think he would react if he was still in his prime physically and mentally, having the energy and the hormones of a young man, Do you really believe that he will just give up the idea of conquering Germania and avenging Rome's honor and his own? Of course not. And by that time, even if Augustus was never a general, a commander, or a warrior type of emperor, after all these decades alive and being young and always in his prime, I still think he would have got one or two things about how commanding an army thanks to his now deceased old friend Agrippa. So, with tons of more legions with him, Augustus will personally lead the charge into Germania once again, and after a few years, even if it would be extremely hard to conquer it, Augustus will be able eventually by pure rage almost to do it, spamming his army into the region again and again in a Punic War style until finally Germania, or at least part of it, would fall into Roman control, with Arminius, if not dead by that point, being captured, tortured, exposed for the people of Rome during a triumvirate, and finally crucified. It will be also during this time that finally most of the people across the empire during Augustus' travels that they will see in person this almost divine emperor, being in his mid-70s and still looking young and sharp, realizing that it was not a rumor or propaganda coming from the emperor. He was really the immortal emperor he claimed to be, being now undeniable for everyone, even the common people, that Augustus was here to stay, maybe forever even. And by the time when he died in the original story, in 14 AD, it was pretty obvious to everyone in the known world that knew about Rome and his emperor that he was really immortal, not just an extremely well-preserved old man in his 70s, especially seeing how a lot of the people Augustus once knew, most of them had already died by this point, even her daughter Julia, which, fun fact, died around the same time that her father in our timeline, but here she will die alone. In this timeline, there will not be a succession crisis or issue of any mean in the empire, because Augustus was already there, immortal and uncontested, and while on private, he was a very socially awkward guy and kind of a jerk. As a leader and politician, he was unanimously accepted and loved by most of the people of the empire that didn't know him personally. Now Augustus had to consolidate and civilize a new Roman province, building new cities there and sending important Roman figures in order to start the process of Romanization of the area, which now that most of the people knew and had little doubts that he was really immortal, would be really easy, and from now on, Augustus will not even need to move in order to his voice be heard by anyone, especially by his enemies and the barbarians not conquered yet by the empire. Just his reputation was enough for every barbarian tribe to surrender to the will of the empire, which was a huge advantage in order to not mobilize as many soldiers and Roman people as it should have been needed normally. Thanks to all of that, the Pax Romana that Augustus started in our timeline would have reached his peak already in the 1st century AD instead of the 2nd century. Now, with his new reputation as an immortal demigod, Augustus had to think a lot about what will be his next moves, because with all the possibilities that his reputation allowed him, he would no longer see the size of his massive empire as big of an issue as in our timeline. And with fewer armies and brute force being needed for extending his empire, I believe he will start to think by this point bigger on his plans for the future of the empire. First of all, I think with time, he will probably make all the German tribes surrender to his rule and control. Again, thanks to his reputation and legitimacy as an immortal man blessed by the gods, rather than for the number of his armies due to a quite low population for the empire he was ruling in. An issue that he will eventually address, realizing how many people they needed in order to populate new conquered areas with Roman citizens or at least Roman allies, a problem that even Augustus in our timeline saw and tried to fix but without a lot of success. But here, he will have the time to implement all the reforms necessary in order to increase significantly the population of the empire, creating new opportunities for jobs, education, and innovation. Again, we are talking about an Augustus almost a century years old, with the mind, flexibility, and adaptability of a young man in his prime, and Augustus was already extremely smart without being immortal. Now, he will definitely become the greatest genius that the world has ever seen. Also, around the time that Augustus died in our timeline, the Parthians took control over Armenia, which could be a great opportunity for Augustus in order to justify a direct confrontation with the enemies that Mark Antony was so obsessed about. So, after a few years of preparation and good planning, while also assembling and forming the biggest army in human history until that moment, thanks to all the new provinces and people that he had conquered just with the legitimacy of his immortality, Augustus would have launched an invasion of Parthia. dividing his armies in two, with one of them reconquering Armenia, while the other would first invade and conquer Mesopotamia like Trajan did in our timeline. And later, with time, all the Parthian Empire taking advantage of the succession crisis the Parthians were experimenting at that time with their contested King Artabanus II. And with that, finally, since the times of Alexander the Great, Parthia or Persia was once again under Western civilization control. Although it would have been an extremely hard campaign, I have no doubt that the Parthian nobility, seeing in person this emperor of almost 100 years old, looking so young, so fresh, so alive, and so healthy, it will be undeniable that he was truly an immortal emperor, and therefore more legitimate than anyone else to rule over them if they had to be conquered by someone. With that, Augustus would have become the greatest conqueror in all human history. He would have accomplished more than any other man since the beginnings of civilization itself. But, even if he was the incontestable emperor of all those lands, it was still almost impossible to manage with great efficiency such a huge empire, the biggest empire in all human history until that moment. Therefore, Augustus would have been in the need to design a new type of government and way of ruling all these provinces, deciding that the best thing to do was to divide the empire into 3 sub-empires, to say it in a way, giving the command of each of these empires to someone competent and that he trusted, being him as the immortal being that he was, who will always choose the successor of those sub-empires. For example, I think he would have divided the empire into 3 parts, the west, the east, and the far east in the case of Persia, putting in charge of one of those empires someone like Caligula maybe, which in this timeline having grown with his father Germanicus, or at bare minimum raised by Augustus himself, he would probably not have turned into this crazy and lunatic guy that he was in our timeline. While Tiberius, I don't believe he would get a big role in the plans of Augustus. First of all, these two hated each other a lot. Second of all, Tiberius in our timeline didn't even want to become emperor. He was almost forced to do it because there was nobody else to do the job. But here, with Augustus being immortal, that will not be an issue, and I think he will have a quiet and peaceful life during his old age until his eventual death. With all of those issues fixed, Augustus, without even realizing it, he just had created what we would call in our timeline feudalism. With the years passing, Augustus would become extremely famous among even the most disconnected and primitive barbaric tribes possible, and with this reputation of the immortal emperor, and the increasing population of his empire thanks to his reforms, he will keep expanding his empire, encouraging his sub-empires to do the same. I can imagine Augustus conquering most of the German tribes across all the 1st century AD, while, for example, the Emperor of the East could conquer the Dacians and all the coastline of the Black Sea. And in the case of the sub-empire of the Romano-Persians, they could try to conquer with time the Far East until reaching all of India, annexing them as a new Roman province, or at least a client state. I also think that eventually, and very close to when it happened in our timeline, Augustus will also conquer Britain, but also the Picts and Hibernia, because why not? But even with all the successions issues fixed, with the superior growth rate of the empire fixed compared to our timeline, there was still an issue that became more and more a real problem: traveling and sending messages across all the empire. Augustus then, with over a century of knowledge and wisdom, will start to study many fields that could help him find a way to create new ways of traveling faster, or sending a message faster across all of these territories anyway. And it would be during his investigations and studies that he would learn about a certain guy that lived in Alexandria called Heron of Alexandria, which was a Greek engineer and mathematician that invented a strange steam machine that caught the curiosity of the emperor. And finding these strange inventions interesting, Augustus will travel personally in Alexandria in order to meet Heron and his students, and to learn more about these strange technologies and machines. And again, I am not saying that the Augustus of our timeline would be as smart or have those same ideas in normal circumstances, but I am saying that an immortal Augustus with the brain plasticity of a 25 years old young man in his prime would be able, after over 100 years of being alive, to understand, learn, and acquire multiple skills far quicker than any other human in history, and therefore have ideas and an ingenuity that nobody else could have without prior knowledge. With all of that clarified, of course it would be an honor for Heron of Alexandria that the immortal emperor wanted to meet him and to discuss his inventions and ideas, learning from Heron during many months about all his inventions and knowledge, until Augustus started to adapt and understand engineering himself, having the brilliant idea to ask Heron if he thought it could be possible to use the pushing power of his steam engine in order to move ships faster across the sea. And with this idea and many others, Augustus would have started the Industrial Revolution without knowing. With more years passing, and even after Heron's death, his students will keep his work alive, also thanks to Augustus' extremely generous financial donations for those projects and innovations, and at some point during the late 1st century, they would finally have the first successful tries to move ships faster with gigantic steam engines, while also understanding that ships made of steel and metals could be better for this kind of machines than just wood. And with all of that, and thanks to the huge knowledge of a person that was almost 200 years old by that point, the Roman Empire would start to industrialize rapidly in all aspects thanks to the ideas, high intellect, and skills of their immortal emperor. And by the year 117 AD, what was in our timeline the peak of Rome's power, in this timeline it would be just the beginning of a golden age that just barely started. At least, if he does not get killed eventually. And with that, I think this is a perfect moment in time to end our story for now. I hope all of you like this crazy idea for my first alternate history video. I can't, however, end this video without being honest, and give credit to the user that gave me this crazy idea originally of an immortal Augustus, which was the creator Possible History, who, a few years ago, he made a crazy alternate history where Charlemagne could blend minds or mind control people, which I founded very funny and interesting, referring to the concept of giving to an important historical figure a superpower and try to figure out how it would take advantage of it. Since then, he erased, or more like he discontinued that story from his YouTube channel from a reason I am not aware of, and I always found it kind of sad that he did that, because in my opinion at least, it was one of his best oldest videos he made during his humble beginnings as a content creator on the platform. But anyway, that's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe to this new channel, give a like to this video, and without anything else to say, see you next time.